Hello and welcome back. Crosstown Gamer here with the triumphant return of our solo playthrough of various coin or counterinsurgency games. I know it's been about 10 months since my last video, and I apologize for that. Life kind of had some events in it that got in the way. So I am back, and I know we were in the middle of a playthrough of Colonial Twilight, and I will return to that after we get done with this playthrough series. So don't worry if you're on the edge of your seat of who's going to win that game. You will find that out, just not right now. So because it's been so long since my last video, and I just got People Power in the mail not that long ago, about a week ago. I figured now's as good a time as ever to jump on the new hotness and make sure that I make a video series for this in case there are people out there who want to know how this game plays and maybe make a purchasing decision based on that, or this is their first coin game and they don't know how to play or how the bots work. So yeah, I just wanted to make a clean start for my return, and again, we will go back to Colonial Twilight after this. So without further ado, let's jump right into how to play this game. Oh, one last bit of information. So this is going to be like my other playthrough series, where this first episode is just going to go through the basic rules of the game, the general flow, what all the pieces do, what they mean, how to win, etc. And then we're actually going to get into the meat and potatoes and actually start playing in the second video. So if you just want gameplay, skip to video 2 once that is released. Otherwise, stick with me and we're going to learn how to play People Power together. So, when you open the box and set everything up, then this is what you get. You have a beautiful map of the Philippines here. And this game in particular is about insurgency in the Philippines, 1981 to 1986. Technically, I wasn't alive yet during this event, so I don't have the greatest historical knowledge of the event, and I apologize if I get anything wrong. But I have been to the Philippines. It's a wonderful place to be. I can speak a little bit of Tagalog, and it's absolutely stunningly beautiful. It's amazing food there, the most polite people you'll ever meet. So I recommend it as a place to go if you're bored or you want to travel or anything like that. So anyway, we have this map of the Philippines. Let's get into how to play this game. In this coin game, you have 3 different factions. That is a little bit different from the traditional 4 factions that you would get in a game. So you have the blue faction, which represents the government, the yellow faction, which represents the reformers, and the red faction, which represents the NPA. I believe it's New People's Army. It's NPA. So I am going to be playing this solo, as you know, and I have chosen the NPA as the faction that I'm going to be playing as. The other 2 factions are going to be simulated via the bots that come with the game. Some of the coin games force you into a particular choice, like you can only really play as the government. But this one is different in that you can select any one you want, and then the other 2 can be run with bots. Or if you're playing 2 players, then the third player can be a bot, whatever. So just a quick overview of the actual pieces that you're playing with here. The government has 3 different types of pieces. They have these dark blue cubes, the light blue cubes, and these circular discs. The dark blue cubes are going to be troops, the light blue are police, and the cylinders or the discs are bases. Functionally, these are actually a little different, but they both belong to the government and they count for things like control and stuff that we'll get into. So certain actions can only be done via the troops here, and then certain actions can only be done from the police. But overall, they contribute to the government's various pieces that they can use. Then you have the reformers. these have two different types of pieces. You also have bases similar to the government, and you have these cylinders. The cylinders can either be face up, in which case they are considered to be active, or face down, in which case they are considered to be inactive. And various gameplay mechanisms rely on whether pieces are face up or face down. These are bases, and these are called activists, if I didn't say it already. Then you have the MPA pieces. Much in a similar fashion, you have bases, and then you have these octagonal cylinders. They can't really be a cylinder if they're octagonal, huh? Octagonal prisms. Then these are either face up or face down as well. These are guerrillas, and the face up is considered to be active, and the face down is considered to be underground. Now, I might say inactive for these pieces and underground for these pieces, and so I'm sorry if that upsets you. So those are the different pieces on the game. You also have this track that goes around the outside of the board here, and this track tracks things like resources for each of the three factions. I did set up the discs to track the non-player factions, even though just to show you what they would look like for the standard setup of the game. But I am going to remove these because for the non-player factions, you actually do not track resources. They get to do everything for free. So you can spend resources to do actions, to put things on the board or take things off the board or flip various markers around. I will tell you how to win in just a second. I do need to tell you exactly how the board is laid out and what it means. So the board is comprised of various spaces, which are bordered by these light blue lines. There are also additional spaces in the form of these circles here, 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 and here. So there are 4 of those circles. The non-circles, so the irregular shapes, here are considered to be countryside spaces, and then the circles are cities. So they're just different spaces, but both types of spaces can hold the various pieces of the game. So there are a couple of spots though, like the South China Sea over here and the Sulu Sea down here, which are not in the game. They are just to block adjacency, which I'll talk about now. So you have a spot like Visayas, and it is considered to be adjacent to another space on the board if it touches it. So the border, if their borders touch or are overlapping like this. So we have Southern Luzon is adjacent to Visayas because they touch. Visayas is also adjacent to Cebu because their borders touch. It's pretty straightforward. So Central Mindanao adjacent to Western and Eastern Mindanao, as well as Visayas, but not adjacent to Cebu because they're too far apart. So similarly, Visayas is not adjacent to Northern Luzon up here because the South China Sea is in the way. And again, Sulu and South China Sea are not playable spaces. So those are the different types of regions on the map. In each region, you have various bits of information. You do have the name of the region, and it tells you what it's adjacent to, which is kind of nice. It only does that for this one, I guess. Then you also have this box with a number up here. This denotes the population of that space. So Visayas has a population of 1, Cebu has a population of 2, Manila 5, and so on. The population affects as kind of like a score multiplier. So the various things we're going to be tracking for victory conditions are essentially multiplied by the population, and that's how much it contributes to your score. So the 1 regions are less valuable, I guess, than like the 5 in Manila. You also have this box to the left here, which says neutral right now. There's nothing in it. This box has room for a marker that looks something like this. And there are actually 3 different markers that can go in that spot. There is a dark blue one that says support on it. Oh, support. There is a yellow one. This says oppose or opposition. And there's a red one that says resist or resistance. So, a space like this can be in one of 4 different states. It can either be neutral, in which there's no marker, or it can have support, opposition, or resistance. As you might have guessed by the color, the government wants there to be support for the government in a spot. The NPA, or the red pieces, want the red markers, so they want resistance to the government. And the yellow wants the yellow markers. They want opposition to the government. And so, again, if it's neutral, it doesn't matter for anybody. It doesn't contribute to anyone's score. Then, lastly, you have this space over here, which this one already has a marker in it, and it's called control. This is really important for any of the coin games, but for this one, the 2 factions that care about control are the NPA on one side. If you flip this marker over, the government has a control marker as well. They care about that as well. If there's no marker in it, it is considered to be uncontrolled. I will go through how to flip these various markers after we talk a little bit about what each faction wants, which I guess I will go ahead and do now. Like, how do you actually win this game? So you have this track along the edge here, and this is tracking your various bits and pieces. It's a multi-purpose track, so it tracks the resources that your faction currently has. In a 3-player game, there would be other markers here for the resources there. Then you also have these other markers here for different things. So the government marker up here is control plus patronage, and it starts at 18. And then you have an aid marker, you have a patronage marker, you have a resistance plus bases marker, and you have an opposition plus bases marker. So it's really the ones that you care about for score are this one, and the one way up there. The way that the NPA wins the game, and so this is what we care about here, is we want to get as much resistance as we can on the map. So again, that's this marker here, but the red one, plus the number of bases that we have on the map to be greater than or equal to 14. The yellow faction, the reformers, want opposition plus bases to be greater than or equal to 13. The government wants government control, plus the patronage to be greater than or equal to 19. So you have these kind of bars to help you on the right. Patronage gets its own marker here, so we're adding up this value plus the amount of control that the government has, and we're going to get 18. So the patronage is at 5, and then if we add up, remember it's a multiplier by the population here. So the control here is worth 5 points, control here is worth 2 points. So we have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 13 plus the 5 for patronage gets them to their 18 victory points. Now these do move up and down in real time. However, if one faction crosses the finish line, it doesn't actually mean that they automatically win. That's why there's this question mark next to each of these spots. In order for them to win, you have to get through this deck of cards to a specified stopping point. There's going to be a point at which we pause the game and check whether people can win or not. So the government's really close to winning, and we've got some ways to go. So again, we care about resistance and bases. Reformers care about opposition and bases. So we care about bases a lot, and then the various support, opposition, resistance, neutrality of a space, whereas the government just cares about this patronage marker as well as control on the map. This is a very asymmetric game, similar to the other coin games, which are very asymmetric. So different ways to win, different options for what you can do on your turn, etc. It's really fun. Okay, so next is kind of just the general sequence of play that we're going to go through. And this is what this area of the map is for. So this is going to be similar to what you'll see in all of the other coin games. This is kind of the heart and soul of what makes a coin game a coin game. But there are some differences to other entries. So if you're unfamiliar with those, fear not, we're going to go through how this one works. So there's a marker for each faction here, and they start off in this eligible factions box. That means that on the first turn of the game, any of the three factions is capable of taking their turn. The actual, marching of time that happens is played out through this deck of cards. We're gonna pre-construct this deck of cards. I'm gonna do it off camera, but the deck of cards contains a lot of events which look like this. You can see they all look kind of similar to that. Where there's like two sections. There's a shaded and an unshaded section of the card. There's some information at the top. There's the name of the card and so on. But these are going to get flipped over one at a time until we get to a special type of card, which I'll talk about later. And so as the game goes on, we're going to have a card that is considered the active card. This represents one turn of the game. In the top right corner here, there's going to be three different symbols, and these correspond to the three factions in the game. So the red one's the NPA, then we have the government and the reformers. This is the order in which the players are allowed to operate. So first eligible is going to be the NPA. So we get to decide what to do first. We can either we can do one of four-ish different things. So we can go follow these arrows here, go to this upper section, and we can do an operation plus a special activity, which I'll talk about soon, or we can do an operation only or the event. We get our choice there, in which case we would go there. If we didn't want any of these things, we could do a limited operation to remain eligible for next turn, or we could pass and get some resources. So let's talk about this way first. So if we wanted to, this is how we could do the event on the card. And the way it would work is we would either pick the unshaded section or the shaded section, and we would do exactly what it says, no more, no less, on the card. Typically, the unshaded section is going to be beneficial to the government, and the shaded section is going to be beneficial to the other two factions. But that's not always there might be a reason strategically why you might want to pick the other one. But say we picked the event, we would remove all government troops from Eastern, Central, and Western Mindanao. So we would look, they have a troops here, a troops here, a troops here. We would just get to remove all those from the game, from the board, and put them back to available. And then we would be done. And it would be the next eligible faction's turn to pick what to do. Now, suppose we did that. Then the government faction is more limited in what its options are. It can no longer go on this branch. It has to either pick this box, or it can do a limited operation, or it can pass. You can always do these. So suppose it does decide to do this, it's going to do an operation plus a special activity, just like that. And then the third eligible faction, and this is a little bit unique to this game, normally in most coin games, only two factions get to operate on a given turn. Then what would happen is these would go. They would go over here to ineligible, and then on the next card, the other two factions, or however many there are, would get to operate on that card, and so on. And this one, even though both of these boxes are filled up here, the third eligible does always get the option to perform a limited operation, or they can pass and get some resources. So they get to do something too. Suppose they do a limited operation. So now this card is completely played out. Everyone's done something. If you're over in this section of the board, you go to ineligible and you're not able to act on the next card that comes up. However, if you're on this side, you do remain eligible and you get to operate on the card. So even though the yellow faction did get to do an operation, they get to stay eligible, and then when we discard this card and pull the next one, now normally the NPA would get to go first again, but we're ineligible, so we skip them and we go straight to the reformers. They get to operate. They can do whatever they want. Say they do this. And no one else is eligible to move. So that's the end of this turn. We would discard this card. I'm moving pieces around. Anyone that was ineligible will go over here to eligible, and anyone that was in this section of the board will go over here to ineligible. And so you kind of get this push and pull, turning of the wheel as people go in and out of eligibility. So that's how that works, basically. And you'll see as we go how it works in more detail. Okay, so what are these operations or special activities? What is that all about? So an operation, so there's this, everyone gets a menu, I guess, of actions that they can do. So they look like this, and you can open it up, and it has the other two factions in there. And then on the back, it has some other information that we'll talk about soon. So you have operations on the left, and you have special activities on the right, or special abilities. I'm going to call them the wrong thing because of other coin games, but that's okay. Oh no, it says activity here and abilities here. That's funny. Okay, so if you do just an operation, that means you're only selecting something from the left part of the board, or the card. So you can either, if you're the reformers, you can either recruit, assemble, persuade, or protest. Each of these has a particular bit of information as to what the purpose of the action is, where you're allowed to do it, how much it costs in resources, and then it tells you exactly how to carry out that action. So in each space, place one activist or replace two with the base, or if there's a reformer base already there, place activists up to the population plus the bases. So each faction does have a slight difference in how these work. So you'll notice, we have something called rally instead of recruit, and government has something called train, but the basic idea is the same, where you're putting more pieces onto the map. And then, you have these other, usually each faction has something to put pieces on the map, something to move pieces around the map, your own pieces, something to remove enemy pieces, and then something to do with support or opposition or resistance, that kind of thing. Okay, so if you do an operation only, you're allowed to do one of these operations, pick one of them, and you're able to do it in multiple spaces. So if you did protest, you could do it in 4 different spaces or 10 different spaces, depending on how many resources you have or how many you want to do it in. That's what an operation is only. Limited operation is slightly different. It is the same thing. It is an operation. I just said it was different, and then I said it was the same. It is an operation, but you only do it in one space. So that's what it means to be limited. Then you have plus special activity. If you did operation plus a special activity, you get to pick something on the right side of the board. However, you don't necessarily get to pick anything. There's this bit in the upper corner here, which tells you which of the special abilities you're allowed to do. So if you choose recruit, you're only allowed to do appeal or convert. So you could do appeal and convert. You could not do canvas. However, if you did persuade, you could do any of them. So that's essentially how that works. I'm probably over explaining it. And I'm sorry. And then down here you do have your victory conditions again, in case you missed them. So that's operation, limited operation, operation plus special activity, and the event. We've covered all the different actions that you can do on a normal turn. Now, eventually, what's going to happen is we're going to get, partway through the deck, and one of these special cards is going to come up. And these are election cards. And they're going to come up in the order of the year. So these have slightly different powers that you're going to go through. But this is where, when this comes up, you immediately stop everything that you're doing. You pause the game, basically, and then you go through this separate flow down here. So you're checking, did anyone win yet? Is this, you do a few things on here on this track, and it's all laid out on the back exactly how these work individually. But you check to see if anyone's won. If it's the last campaign, each stack of cards until you get to an election is considered a campaign. If it's the last campaign, then you do these few things and then you end the game. Then you go on to the newsmakers, resources, support, redeploy, reset. This you follow this, you reset everything, and then you resume play by drawing the next card. In a normal coin game, if anyone wins in one of the intervening election years, if anyone's crossed the victory threshold, when this card comes up, they win. When you are playing solo, you do have to make it to the end and still win, so you don't get to end it early. However, you can lose early, so you can't win early, but if one of the NPCs has crossed their victory threshold and the election comes up, the game ends there. We are going to go through that in great detail once that election comes up. I'm not going to bore you with it right now, but essentially a lot of resources are going to move around. A lot of these markers are going to change hands, and then everything's going to get flipped back to underground or inactive, and then you're going to proceed. So that's the general flow of the game. Then the last couple of things to denote before I talk about the bots is we talked about how these things affect your score, but we didn't really talk about control yet. So a control marker is put in place. You tally up how many pieces of your faction and how many pieces of the other two factions are in a space, and then if the amount of pieces is greater than all the other factions combined, you have control of that space if you're the NPA or the government. Again, the reformers don't really care about control, so they can never be in control of a space. So they do have there's a little bit of a caveat to that, but I'll get to that in just a second. So up here, for example, the government has control because they have and basis count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces, and the other two factions combined have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces. So 6 is more than 5, so the government has control. Similarly, up here we have 4 pieces to 2 pieces, so the government has control. Yeah, I'm bumping stuff around. I'm gonna have to recheck everything to make sure it's in the right spot because I don't think it is. I think it was like this. Government has control here because there's no one else there. Here you have 1-to-1 basically, so it's uncontrolled. So I'm purposefully being slightly vague about the yellow pieces because there is something slightly different about those. So you might think that there's one piece here and one piece here. Why does the red faction have control? Because it's not greater than the other pieces combined. And that's because you always count, for the yellow pieces, you always count the bases, but you only count the activists if they are active at the time. So up here, we are counting the activists because they are active, but we're not counting them for control down here because they are inactive. The way that active versus inactive works is they are only active if there is a protest marker in that space. So as soon as this protest marker were to leave for whatever reason, all these would immediately get flipped underground. If there was a protest marker that was placed in this space, immediately everything that's in this space that's yellow flips up. So the protest marker is what dictates active versus inactive for the reformers, and that's what will dictate control, or if they contribute toward control or not. On the reverse of these, there's another marker called strike that the NPA can put on the board through various of their operations. There can never be a protest marker and a strike marker in the same spot. And similarly, there are also these terror markers up here. There can never be a protest, strike, or terror in the same spot. So the game comes with 6 of these markers, but they say only use 4 in the game. You would use the other 2 if you lose them for whatever reason. So we have 4 of those markers, and suffice to say that control, you add up the other active pieces for the reformers, but you add up all the pieces that are your own and then all the enemy pieces, and that will tell you whether a space is in control or not. Hopefully that makes sense. So let me see. I think that's essentially it. When an election card does come up, it's going to start here, and it might have a special power. The game starts with this one with a special power. So protest spaces to opposition instead of shifting. What that means is when the reformers protest, instead of shifting a space 1 level toward opposition, they just get to set it to opposition. So I guess I should talk a little bit about how it shifts, because it is slightly different than other coin games. So if there was a spot that was neutral and you shifted it towards support, neutral goes immediately towards support, and you can put a marker down. However, if it's already at support and you're shifting it toward opposition, for example, if you shift it 1 level toward opposition, you're putting it to neutral. If you shift it another level toward opposition, you would get to put the opposition marker down. It's this triangle. It's actually laid out really well in the rule book, the way that it works here. So neutral's in the middle, and then 1 level in any direction will put a marker down. So it's pretty cool. Okay, you also have 2 other things. Momentum is a key word you should recognize from other coin games. Momentum just means it will last until the next election card. So let's see, I think there are some like government momentum. If this card was played, it would be in effect until the next election card came up, and then it would get removed. So there are 2 different special types of cards that are personalities, these are an optional rule, but we're going to be playing with them. Each faction does have some personalities to pick. We're going to pick these at the beginning of the game. We're going to pick one of them, and then in the election sequence down here, we'll get to choose other ones. During the 1984 election, we'll get to also pick an act of desperation, and these have an effect. If a condition is met, then these have an effect on final scoring. So it's kind of a last-ditch effort to get some extra points in. It's an act of desperation. So we'll talk about these when they come up as well, but essentially each faction will have a card. There will be a condition on the card. If they fulfill that condition at the end of the game, then they get to add some points based on what the card says. The personalities just have special powers that you can use until you choose another one, basically. So it makes this one makes rally more powerful. So those are the 2 special types of cards, and we have some pawns here. I'm probably going to forget to use these, but all these are for marking which spaces that you're doing for operations and which spaces you are doing for special activities. You also have these overflow boxes. If a space gets too crowded, you can plonk one of these down and put the pieces here instead, just so that way, it's less cluttered. Okay, I think that's it. And now we're going to talk about how the bots work at a high level. So there are these cards here, and this is true of Gandhi and now Fire in the Lake, and I believe one other game, maybe Cuba Libre, has these cards now too. And they all function relatively similarly. So I haven't shuffled these up. I'm going to take the red ones out because we're playing as the red faction. But then I'm basically going to shuffle what's left. And each of these is two-sided. There's an A side and then a AA side, a B side and then a BB side. We're going to start with them face up. And when the government player wants to do something, like suppose they want to, it's their turn. They're going to always do the event if it's a critical event. And if they're not, then this is how they're going to select which operations and which special activities they're going to do and where and how they're going to do that. So there's a few pieces of information. There's the faction that this card is for up here. There's this die here, which is called an activation number. And then there's various boxes and arrows. So first we're going to look at this box. We're going to roll 1d6, and if it's less than or equal to the available cubes, then we're going to follow the green arrow. If that condition is false, we're going to follow the red arrow. It's not really an arrow, but the red line. This symbol means draw a new card. So if you roll 1d6 and it's greater than the available cubes, we would just draw a new card and do that one. Although that's the same condition, so we would keep drawing new cards until we got to like this one. Any 2+ population space without government control. If that was true, we would follow the green arrow. If not, we would draw a new card. We'd keep doing that until we get to actually do something. So now, suppose we did 1d6 greater than, or I guess for these, we would be rolling the die separately each time. I should note that. Again, we're going to follow this along. This means flip the card over. So if this was false, we would just flip it over and we would start at the top here and we would do sweep and then we would do one special activity. But suppose it was true, we would do train as our operation, and the rules of actually how the train gets carried out are here, and it's the same as what a normal player would do. But there are some priorities on, and this says, how you're going to select spaces, and you carry these out to the maximum extent. Then after you're done, you're going to do a special activity if that's what they say to do. You're selecting a special activity, and the red means the condition has to be true in order for this to actually happen. So at the beginning of the game, this wouldn't take place because we wouldn't enrich because we're not in the 1983 campaign. So you would do B, you would do charm. So this is a lot better than the flowcharts, and these are going to be all shuffled together, like I said. But suppose it was the reformer's turn, you actually keep these. You put it under the deck, and you keep drawing cards until you get to a reformer card, and then you would do that. So there's a little bit of a mix as it goes on. So the activation number, what does that mean? This is anytime, so training, you're going to carry, since the government doesn't track resources, they're not spending resources every time they're carrying out actions. And so you're going to do the initial action, and then to see if you get to do it in another space, you're going to roll a die. And if it's more than this number, you're going to keep doing it. And if it's less than the number, you're going to stop. Actually, I might have that backwards. when we actually play, I'll know that for sure. But essentially, you keep rolling the die and doing it in spaces until you either exceed or not exceed the activation number, and then you stop. So that's the limiting factor rather than the actual resources at play here. So there are a couple of extra rules that the bots don't adhere to that the players do adhere to. Anytime you're putting pieces onto the map as a player, but you don't have any pieces left, and so say this was the situation, and it was like I need to add 2 more gorillas. I can, if I would like, take them from anywhere on the map and put them in the spot where I'm going. The bots never do that. They're not allowed to. And then also, sometimes if you do an operation and then you have to flip a card, or it tells you to flip a card or something, you could end up doing a pair of operations and activities that would not normally be allowed. So you might sweep and then do reprisal, even though that's not allowed. That's okay. The bots can do that. I think that's essentially it. There's this. Oh, yeah. So, for the non-player factions, you also have this extra card here, which is super helpful. So it tells you first, if the event is critical and effective, then do the event. Otherwise, you're doing an operation, a special activity, if they're first eligible. If you're second eligible, you're doing if you're meeting these criteria, you're doing these actions. If you're third eligible, you're always going to do a limited operation. So it'll tell you how to do that, and the conditions under which that the non-player faction will pass. Really quickly, I should show you what a critical event looks like, because I've mentioned it twice now and I haven't showed you. So there's the symbol here, and there's a silhouette in the background for each of these. Normally, here's one with none. So this is not a critical event for any faction. This one is critical for the NPA and for the government because it has that silhouette in the back of it. So the bots want to do those actions, and so they'll likely do the event if it's effective. And effective means, something is getting added or removed. Some resources are being reduced or added. If the event does something, then they're going to do it based on this chart. There's also priorities. So if it says to add pieces, the government, the NPA, and their formers always want to add bases first. If they can, then they're going to do cubes based on, these conditions. So there's all these different tables. Lastly, there are 2 more tables here. This table will tell you for priorities for selecting spaces. So if you're doing an enrich, then you're going to look at this column. If you're placing cubes on the map, then you're going to look at this column. If you're sweeping, you're going to do this column. So suppose you're placing cubes. You're reading top to bottom here, and you're going down the list until you find a space that is on its own, a single space in which all those conditions are met. So first, you're going to look if there's government control or no government control in a space. There might be multiple spaces. So if you're placing cubes, you're not going to pick Cebu or Manila or Zamboanga or Davao, but you would potentially pick Central Mindanao or Visayas or Southern Luzon. So there are multiple spaces in which that criteria is met. So you keep going. Now you have a narrowed down list. Are there any vulnerable bases? This is bases that don't have a lot of protection. So they don't have underground guerrillas or inactive reformers, or they don't have enough cubes. The bases are vulnerable for whatever reason. And you might narrow down your list a little further, and then you come down here and then you select, okay, well, which space has the most population? And these end up being tiebreakers. So if there are multiple spaces with, a population of 2, and that's the highest, you keep going. Eventually, say fewest enemy pieces, this is the one where, okay, now only one space meets that criteria. That's the space you're going to choose. If suddenly like none of the spaces meet that criteria, you will end up selecting spaces at random, and that's just assigning a number to each of the dies, and rolling for it, basically. So, if these two spots had equal priority after that selection process, I'd say, okay, a 1, 2, or a 3, we're going to do this. A 4, 5, or a 6, we're going to do that. So each of these, that's what the dots mean. The red dots mean a condition has to be met first for it to happen. And you have a table like this for each of the factions. We're not going to care about this one because we're only doing bots for these two. Then you have this long chart for move priorities, but it's a similar thing. First, you're picking a destination, then you're picking an origin space, and you're going down based on which faction you are, these various priorities. On the back, we have the election round instructions for the non-player factions. This is how they're going to, shuffle the markers around, how they're going to get their resources, and so on. And the game is going to keep going until we reach the last election card. There's this one that's active at the beginning of the game, and there will be 2 more. And so we're going to do two rounds basically, and the game's going to be over at that point. Whoever has the most points or has crossed their victory threshold will win. If multiple factions have crossed their victory threshold, then it goes down to who exceeds it by the largest margin. That's who's going to win. In the event of a tie, there's some tiebreakers in the rules. Well, first the government wins, and it'll have some rules based on that. If nobody has won, then it's whoever was closest to their victory threshold at the end of the game. And again, we will be doing these acts of desperation, so the points might get modified last minute there. But that, in a nutshell, in a 47-minute nutshell, is how to play People Power. So if you're still with me, thanks for watching, and I'm going to construct the deck off camera and do the last minute couple of checks that we need to do, and in the next video we're going to start playing this wonderful game. So there will not be a 10-month break, I promise, before the next video, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.